Hi everyone, welcome to the second video of this playlist where we will look at confidential client applications or server-side client applications. So this is an application which runs on web server. So it is safe to use client secret in these kind of applications. And these applications generally use authorization code grant flow to get the access token from the authorization server. And since all request goes through client server, in the UI, the access token or the client credentials are never visible. Yeah, the user is using browser, but the browser is sending request to client server and client server is sending request to resource server. So access token, client credentials, everything is stored in client server. So this information never gets to the browser. To create an auth application, you generally go to any auth providers websites. You create your account there and then you register a new application. While registering an application, sometimes OAuth provider may ask you for the type of application. In that case, the type of application will be web application or confidential client. And the grant type to use will be authorization code. And if you want to use refresh token, you can say yes to refresh token. And you need to provide sign in redirect URI, sign out redirect URI. And after successful registration of the application, we get back client ID. So client ID is public information and we get client secret, which should be secret. Now let's look at what is sign in redirect URI which we need to provide in order to create a client application. So this is a callback URI and it must be registered while registering an application. So whenever you redirect the user to authorization server to login, after successful login, their authorization server will redirect the user back to your redirect URI or your sign in redirect URI. And it is used in order to prevent redirection attacks. You may provide multiple values. It depends on auth provider if that supports or not. And the sign-in redirect URIs must be HTTPS URL so that the communication between the authorization server and client application is secure. Now there is one important property called state, which is used while making while redirecting the user to authorization server in order to login. So this is opaque to OAuth2 service. So authorization server doesn't know what its state is. It is a random string for authorization server. So its state is sent from client to authorization server, and after successful login of the user, the state is again sent to client from authorization server. And this is sent in the redirect URI only. Now the advantage of state is it is used to prevent CSRF using random string, and also you can include any information in a state, and when you get that state back you know that from where the user was redirected to the authorization server, then you can redirect the user back to the appropriate page. Now let's look at authorization code grant flow. So this is the flow. User clicks on a login button which is present on your client, then the client creates an authorization URL and it redirects the user to that URL. Then the user enters username and password on that on authorization server's page. After that, the user is presented with a consent screen where user is shown all the scopes the application is requesting for. Then the user can approve or deny the request. If the user approves the request, then user is redirected to the sign in callback URI or sign in redirect URI. Client reads the authorization code from the query parameter in the sign in redirect URI. It also read state as well from the same URI. After it gets the code, it sends the authorization code to the authorization server back. It also sends its client ID and client secret. Then the authorization server verifies all the information and it sends back the access token. It also sends refresh token if applicable. Now, what are the benefits of authorization code grant flow? So the first is it reduces the risk of using authorization code by attacker. So let's say even attacker gets a hold of authorization code, he cannot use that because he doesn't have client ID and secret. Also, access token is not visible to the URL because in the URL he can only see the authorization code. For this flow, there are few responsibilities of OAuth2 client. The first is it needs to redirect the user to authorization server. For this, the client needs to construct the authorization URL, We will see in the next slides how it does that. And then it sends the user to that URL. The second is it needs to accept the authorization code and state parameter from the sign-in redirect URL. So it needs to read the authorization code from the URL. The third is it needs to get the access token from the authorization server. For that, it sends authorization code along with ID and secret to authorization server. And then it needs to store the access token securely so that access token does not leak to the front end. And after that, whenever it needs to act on behalf of the user, it needs to send the request to resource server, and in that request it needs to include that access token. Now let's see how to construct the authorization URL. So this is the template of authorization URL. First we have authorize endpoint. Authorize endpoint is available in the documentation of the authorization server or OAuth provider. Then we include one client ID query parameter. The second query parameter is response type and its value will be code. The third parameter is state and its value will be any random string. Then there will be query parameter called redirect URI, which will have value redirect URI. So this is a sample authorization URL. So we are using GitHub as authorization server here. So the first part is the authorized endpoint of the GitHub authorization server. Then we have client ID. Then we have response type equal to code. Then is state equal to some random generated string from the client server. Then we have redirect URI. This redirect URI should be same which we have registered while creating the client application in the OAuth provider page. And then we will get this type of response from the authorization server once the user approves the application. So we will have the redirect URI. After that, we will have one query parameter called code, which will have the value authorization code. And the second query parameter will have key as state, and its value will be the state which we have passed. Now the client application will read the values of code and state from this application, which was the second responsibility of the client. Now after that, the client needs to get the access token. For that, client sends one request to authorization server with the following information. First is grant type. Grant type will be authorization code. Then the actual authorization code. Then it sends the redirect URI. So redirect URI should be same, which we sent in the previous step. And also it needs to send client authentication information. So this can be HTTP basic auth, or we can include client ID and client secret in post body parameters as well. So how to send it? For that, you need to read the documentation of OAuth provider. Now access token URL is of the following format. We have token endpoint. Then the first query parameter is grant type and its value is code. Then the next query parameter is code and its value will be the authorization code which we got back from the authorization server. The next query parameter is redirect URI, which should be the same which we sent in the previous step. Then we have client ID and client secret. So this is the sample access token URL when we are using GitHub as the authorization server. And this is the response which we will get back from the token endpoint. So we will get back access token, refresh token if we have enabled it, expires in. So this is the seconds after which the access token expires. So in this case, it will expire after 1800 seconds. Then refresh token expires in 3600 seconds. Then the scope, and then we will see token type, which will always be bearer. Now we may get some errors as well. In that case, the errors will be reported at redirect URI. So the user will be redirected to redirect URI with query parameters. First is error, which will be error code. The second will be error description, which will be the error description. But you should not display that error description as it is to the user. Instead, you should tackle them case by case. So following are few sample errors. So let's say redirect URI mismatch when you provide an invalid URI, invalid client ID when the client ID does not match, user denies the request if the user does not approve the consent screen, invalid parameters when some of the parameters are invalid, and invalid scope when the scope which you are requesting is not registered while registering the application. Now let's see how to use the access token. So access token is used whenever you want to send any request to the resource server. And keep in mind, resource server can be same as authorization server as well. So let's say you are sending a get request, but this can be any type of request, not only get. to API endpoint. So you say get API endpoint. So API endpoint is the URL where you want to send the request. Then you will add one header called authorization with some other along with other headers. So the header key is authorization and its value is bearer space the access tokens value. So that's how you send any request. Then that access token will be accepted by the resource server. That was it for this video. In the next video, we will actually create a OAuth2 client application, which will be the confidential client application. And we will create that from scratch. We won't use any library or anything, so that we know what goes under that library. So thank you for watching the video. I will meet you in the next one. Until then, keep learning. Bye.